Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. So this afternoon, we've got a few things to cover. First of all, we're going to quickly touch on the process for making recommendations as an assembly again. Secondly, then we're going to kind of get into the process of developing your recommendations around the topic that you heard this morning, so around kind of planning communities in Scotland. And finally, at the end of the afternoon, we're going to be focusing on your propositions around fairness, which you developed in weekend 2, I believe. And so we're going to return to those, have a look at kind of a consolidated list that's been brought together. And at the very end of the day, you'll be sent a form to do some voting on, both around those fairness propositions, but also around whether or not you would like a 7th weekend as an assembly as well. So first thing to kick off with is the process for developing recommendations. So I'm just going to quickly talk you through the slides that I went over with you at the last weekend, just to remind you of that process. And then there'll be a bit of time to discuss this in your groups again, as well as the question of whether or not you'd like a 7th weekend. So I'm just going to share my screen so you can see the slides. So step one, which you completed at the last weekend, it's weekend 3, was to start to develop your kind of frameworks for recommendations around the 2 topics that we considered at weekend 3, so existing homes and new homes. So those you developed towards the end of the previous weekend. Then between weekend 3 and this weekend, there's been that kind of process of consolidation across groups, so bringing together similar proposals across the different groups, and secondly, the kind of technical refinements and kind of commenting on those proposals as well. So hopefully you've all received that and you've had a chance to have a look at it, but we'll be going over it again, which I'll kind of talk us through in a second, but we'll be looking at those again tomorrow afternoon. So at this weekend, we've kind of started that process again with our 3rd and our 4th theme. So we started this morning with the topic around kind of planning communities, and this afternoon we'll be kind of following that through and developing those kind of frameworks for your recommendations on that topic of planning communities. Then tomorrow we'll be doing the same again for the topic of community services. So you'll again kind of hear the evidence and have some discussion around that topic, and then develop your frameworks for those recommendations tomorrow as well. But as I said, tomorrow afternoon we'll also be returning to the recommendations that you started developing at the previous weekends, and that have now been consolidated, and where we've had kind of comments from Daisy back on those as well. So this will be an opportunity for you to kind of look at how those are being consolidated. So the team have tried their best to make sure that as far as possible they kind of capture all of the different ideas that came out from the groups into kind of a manageable list of recommendations. But it's very possible that they've missed things and things that you think are important. So it'll be an opportunity for you to kind of check their work and kind of flag where there may be things that are missing from your work at the previous weekend. And then secondly, it will also be an opportunity for you to identify kind of further information that you feel you want around those recommendations, and then we'll kind of look at how we can bring that to you in the remainder of the assembly process. So that's what we'll be doing at weekend 4. Then at weekend 5, we'll repeat that process again for the topics you're considering this weekend. So between the weekends, again, there'll be that kind of process of consolidating across the groups the recommendations that you start working on this weekend. But then also Daisy will also do kind of comments on them and provide you some more kind of inputs on those recommendations. and then we will also then have more time to consider them at weekend 5 as well. Depending on whether or not you decide to add an additional weekend, some of what we do in kind of weekends 5 and 6 may change around a little bit. But at the moment, we're saying that weekend 5 we'll also use for you to kind of develop your supporting statements for each of your recommendations. And this will be where we also start to present back the recommendations from our topic area, or our theme, to the rest of the Assembly for some more discussion, and we'll get to hear what they've been working on as well. And then finally, on weekend 6 is where we can review the full set of proposed recommendations, particularly looking for where there may be any kind of contradictions and gaps or wider opportunities. And then at this point, there'll be the vote for you to endorse your recommendations for the final report. So that's how the process looks currently. And as I said, you'll get an opportunity to discuss that in groups in a second. But as we said, there is the opportunity for you as an assembly, if you want it, to have a 7th weekend. And we've heard from a number of you that you're kind of feeling a bit rushed with the process and would like some more time to be able to discuss the different issues, hear some more evidence perhaps around some of the issues as well. So there is that opportunity, if you want it, to kind of for the assembly to ask for a 7th weekend. So in your breakout groups in a second as well, we're going to start that discussion with you. But then later today, when we send around the kind of the voting form at the end of today, you will then have the opportunity kind of individually to say whether or not you would like a 7th weekend for the assembly. And I'll talk you through a bit more about how that's going to work at the end of the day. But for now, we're going to put you back into your breakout groups so you can have a bit of a discussion around those different points. And then we will kind of follow straight on to you starting to develop your recommendations from this morning. So we won't come back between those 2 sessions. So we'll be kind of running through to I think a break after that. So I think it's over now to the production team to set up the breakout groups. On to the final stretch for today, where we're going to be returning to your propositions on fairness that you worked on in weekend 2. So I'm just going to share my screen again and talk you through a few slides. So as you know well by now, fairness is an important part of the Assembly's question. So how should Scotland change to tackle the climate emergency in an effective and fair way? So if you kind of cast your minds back to weekend 2, you heard from Kevin Anderson and a presentation put together by Professor Tashin Jaffrey, another member of the evidence group, which both explored different aspects of what fairness might mean in the context of responding to the climate emergency. And then following this, in your groups, you responded to the statements. To be fair, the recommendations that we as an assembly present to Parliament should ... Overall, across all of the groups.
Yes.
So just a little bit of interference there, but I'll continue. So across all of the different groups, you came up with over 150 different statements, which we've since gone through and we've kind of themed them to put together similar ideas and to kind of get down to a manageable list. And we're bringing back 22 propositions on fairness, which pull together all of the different ideas that you developed in weekend 2. So I'm going to talk you through those different kind of propositions now, and in a little bit you're going to have an opportunity in your groups to kind of talk through them and explore those propositions. But we're also going to be getting you to think about what are the most important to you kind of personally as well. And there will be a vote at the end of the day where you'll be kind of selecting the 10 most important to you. So just to quickly run through the list of 22. So all of these kind of respond to that statement. To be fair, the recommendations that we as an assembly present to Parliament should ... So first of those being spread resources and the costs of change equitably rather than equally, so that those who can afford the most pay the most. The second is support people to grow knowledge and understanding to make informed decisions and help those with the least capacity to make change to play their part. Number three, not disadvantage rural communities. Number four, consider Scotland's impacts and the global share of carbon emissions historically and for embodied carbon. Number five, be free from self-interest and non-partisan. The number six is support high carbon industries through the transition. 7, take into account the needs of different communities across Scotland, recognising that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. 8, support workers in industries where change will lead to job losses. 9, not disadvantage people with disabilities. 10, act immediately so that future generations are not unfairly burdened with the responsibility of making change. Number 11 is not have a negative impacts on developing countries. 12, prioritising measures and investments that benefits everyone for the common good. 13, emphasise that it is everyone's responsibility to make changes, individuals, communities, business and government. 14, put the people of Scotland first. 15, involve ongoing engagement with the people most affected by change. 16, not ask too much change from people too quickly. And on to the final page. 17, not increase social and economic inequalities. 18, protect vulnerable and disadvantaged groups from impacts of climate change and measures to combat it, ensuring no one gets left behind. 19, target the highest emitters so that organisations and individuals with the highest carbon footprint have to make the biggest changes. 20, be affordable to all and not disadvantage people on low incomes. 21, be cost effective and consider implications for the public purse. And finally, 22, ensure that businesses, industries that have benefited most in the past contribute the most. So hopefully those sound kind of familiar to you from what you worked on in weekend 2. They might not exactly match kind of the language you used, but that will be because we've brought together similar ideas from across the different groups. You'll also notice that across all of those 22, there are some that may be kind of in contradiction or at kind of tension with one another, which is absolutely fine. That's because I guess each one of those has been put forward by at least one assembly member or at least kind of one group from weekend 2, so they won't necessarily all be kind of compatible with one another. There may be some kind of contradictions in there as well. So after you've had a bit of time to discuss and reflect on them in your group, we're going to ask you a bit later to individually identify the 10 that seem most important to you for the Assembly to consider when developing and evaluating your recommendations as we go through the rest of the process. So none of the propositions will be lost unless nobody kind of votes for them at that stage. But it's about giving us a sense of kind of where your priorities lie as an assembly. And then the idea is that that kind of list of propositions, once you've prioritised them, we return to it in later weekends to kind of check against your recommendations and make sure that the recommendations that you're putting forward in your report to Parliament are kind of consistent with what you kind of value in terms of fairness. So that's our job for the next session. So we're going to put you into your breakout groups now. You're going to have a chat about those different propositions. And as you do that, think about which of the 10 are the most important to you kind of personally. And we'll be kind of coming back to how the votes will work at the very end of the session today. So now handing over to the production team to put you into the breakout groups. Okay, welcome back everyone. So just a final few things to go over with you before we call it a day. So first of all, thank you very much for your involvement and all the kind of energy and time you've given today. A few things to quickly tell you about kind of what's going to happen next. So soon after we finish, you'll receive an email which will have a link to an online form for you to complete 2 votes. The first of those votes is around you identifying the kind of top 10 propositions of fairness that are most important to you. And the second vote is the vote on whether we should have an additional weekend for the Assembly. So if we were to have an additional weekend for the Assembly, it would take place on the 20th and 21st of March. So that would be kind of 2 weeks after the 6th weekend of the Assembly is currently scheduled. And we can decide, I think, a bit closer to the date whether or not we need the whole weekend or just kind of a shorter kind of section of that weekend. So if 75% of Assembly members vote in favour of the additional weekends, then we'll go ahead with it. And we'll then kind of adjust the plans for the remainder of the Assembly to kind of fit with 7 weeks instead of 6. If the decision is to go with an additional weekend, then you'll receive the same kind of thank you gift for that weekend as well as you're receiving for other weekends. So a few important points to consider when you're thinking about the votes there. So we need you to complete the form before we start again tomorrow morning, because we're kind of planning to announce whether or not we'll be having the 7th weekend at tomorrow's session. So please do complete it ideally this evening once you receive it. This is an important, or both of these are important decisions for everybody to have a say in. So if you're having issues with the forms, kind of accessing the links or anything, please do contact the support team and we'll have people on standby to help you with completing those 2 votes. So the final thing for me to say is that we'll be starting again at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Please do, as you have been, kind of sign in a little bit early so we can resolve any technical issues as quickly as possible before we start. And I'll just hand over to Daisy now for the final word for this afternoon.
Thank you, Tim. And just to echo what you've said, thank you so much for your engagement, for your energy through the day. I know I've had so much to take in myself and process, and I hope it's been quite rewarding for you today, seeing different perspectives and listening and debating and discussing different sides and different issues under the context of community. Really look forward to seeing you again tomorrow and delving into the second question a bit more and starting to look at the real tangibles that come out of it. So thank you so much, everyone, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a lovely evening.